again was, "It's me again, Margaret." You'd have to remember Ray Stevens to understand that. So everyone in this section, for the most part, is not going to get that. I hope everyone's doing well this morning. It's been an interesting week for me. I've known about this for a little while and knew exactly what I was going to talk about, and left myself the entire week before, because for those of you who don't know, I work out of town. And so I was thinking I have all this nice quiet time at a hotel to plan this lesson. As you also know, something I've said and that Dad has said multiple times, whatever you're going to preach on, many times God will make you see that before you preach about it. Needless to say, that week of preparation got a little hectic. But the topic is faith. Starting out, I wanted to take a look at perception. I don't know if any of you have read the book by Andy Andrews, The Noticer, or The Noticer Returns, for that matter. It's the sequel. It's a great book, and it talks about perception and how you perceive life, and how some things that in our life we see as being a huge deal, if you look at your perception and look at the reality of it, how really it may not be anything at all. So to start, in our talk about faith, I wanted to start on patience. It's a similar thing, and you always hear the term, the patience of Job. The patience of Job. You hear it over and over and over throughout your life. When you hear about patience, you hear about Job. And so I looked up the definition of patience. The definition of patience is the capacity to accept or tolerate delay, trouble, or suffering without getting angry or upset. Has anyone ever read Job? He gets angry. He gets upset. He's frustrated. But he's faithful. He doesn't lose his faithfulness. He continues to abide in God and allow God to abide in him, but he's angry and he doesn't understand. It's not the definition of patience. The definition of faith, however, is the belief in things unseen. And if you go through the whole book of Job and you start looking at the conversation between his friends that come to visit, which by the end you start wondering if they're actually friends or not, but the conversations back and forth, what Job has is definitely of faith, because he talks about a God that he has never seen, that he admits that he doesn't even understand, but he continues that faith. And because of that faith, it translated into patience. He never broke his will. He never finally gave in and said, "That's it. I don't want any more of this." His faith translated into patience, and that's where perception comes in. Can you truly ever have patience without faith? Think about that for a second, because patience really is something that we're relying on ourselves to have. We are trying to maintain a tolerance of something. This goes beyond just a faith in God. Faith in general and patience in general, if you have patience, you're relying on yourself to keep that tolerance. But if you look at faith, you can put that in God. And all of a sudden, that burden is a little bit lighter, and you don't have to think about how much you have to do. The perception, God can handle it. When you're trying to be patient with your children, not always easy. We can be honest here. Not always easy to be patient with your children. But why do we try to maintain patience with our children? Because we have faith in the outcome. If we're teaching them correctly, if we're doing the things that we feel that we need to do as parents, then we try to be patient because we have faith that the outcome will be positive. Now, as we're talking about perception, I kind of wanted to have a little side note at this point. There's a lot of things within our life that perception changes. It's not just faith and patience, but there's other things as well that can really change a big issue into something that's nothing at all. Depression. Anyone experience depression in here? We're not going to ask for a raise of hands because then I won't be able to see anybody's face because all the hands will be up. Everybody has put up with a little bit of depression, and the severity has been altered for different people. But depression is something that most people go through. But is depression the issue? Is depression the issue? Or would you say that depression is caused by a lack of hope? A lack of hope in the outcome being positive, the lack of hope in a relationship, the lack of hope in a career, that causes depression. But depression will never be a cause. It'll always be an effect. So keep that in mind when you think about perception. Now I'm doing something a little bit different today. I'm actually going to read out of the Bible instead of doing what most guys my age do and try to read off my phone and off a screen. The screen at this point is pointless unless you do the text at a really large rate. But I want you to go to 1 Corinthians 13:13. 1 Corinthians 13:13. I don't know why I had to repeat that. I just put it up on the thing. I feel like I'm at Green Oaks. 1 Corinthians 13:13 says, "But now abide faith, hope, love, these three, but the greatest of these is love." Now, any of you that have heard me preach before, usually it's about love. Tried to mix it up this time, throw you a curveball. And then William came and hit you with love. So you're going to get it this sermon one way or another. He got you with love. I'm going with faith. But in that, it says that love is the greatest, but faith and hope made that final cut. It made it into the final three. And without faith, there can be no hope. Without hope, there can be no faith. I think we can mostly agree on that because you have to hope in something to continue that faith, and your faith is what gives you hope that it will occur. They kind of work hand in hand with love. Most of us within this room, and this is a topic that's been brought up a lot between other youth ministers and myself recently, most of us were raised in church. Saying that alone doesn't sound like a problem. But if you really think about it, if everybody here today was mostly raised in church, then where's everybody else? And why are they not here? That's a whole other sermon. But many times we do tend to target people who already have Christian values as opposed to going after those who don't, which is our actual call. But since we are mostly raised in church, we would have to either agree, most of us would agree that we are continually growing. And that would be the point. You continue to go to church, you continue to grow spiritually, and a lot of times we don't like to talk about the decline that may come with that. But if our faith is continually growing, and we also read that, or not today, but we've all read that if we have faith the size of a small seed, that we can move a mountain. On my way to church today, I saw absolutely no mountains going through the sky. No mountains were anywhere to be seen. So in my opinion, faith at some point, if it is growing, must also be declining. Because if it hits a certain level, I haven't seen it yet. Got a story. For those of you who have ever ridden on Don Wilson's plane, this is a story of Don Wilson's plane. I have a tremendous fear of heights. Tremendous fear of heights. And it's not something that I would like to have. My bosses in the past have said, "Oh, just grit your teeth and do it." It's not that easy. I start getting, I feel like I'm going to black out. I get dizzy. Don Wilson had invited me and Dad and another man to go to a football game. He was going to fly us down there. And it never occurred to me that I had a fear of heights. I'm just, I'm going to a Bama game. That's all I'm thinking about. And I get on the plane, and I have complete faith that I'm making it to this game, and we're going to have a great day. And then we take off. And all at once, my body said, "Doug, did you forget something?" And I'm not sure if his armrests still have the imprint of my hands, but they did that day. And my dad looked over and he said, "You all right?" said, yeah, I'm good. And as we approach maybe 5,000 feet or so, it kind of gives off. You don't worry as much because you're so far up. I don't know. It's weird on the head, but the faith was so strong when I got on the plane. But when reality kicked in, my faith was gone. That quick. Flying is supposed to be the safest form of transportation, but you can't convince me of that. Peter was the same way in dealing with faith in Jesus Christ. You hear the things that Peter says directly face to face to Jesus Christ. How can you not have faith looking in the face of Christ? And Peter says, yes, God, this is what I believe, and turns directly and does the opposite. Is it because he's just a bad person? No, it's because his faith built and his faith dropped, depending on the circumstances. And it continued to do that because he was human. A belief in things unseen, faith. Is that definition even true? Is it completely true? A belief in things unseen. Have you ever seen any evidence of a God whatsoever? I would hope so, because we're all here. In Judges, I told you it's not my job to do the clicker, and now I'm messing up. In Judges 6, verses 11 through 12. For those of you who aren't up on your Judges, this is where it starts talking about Gideon. Most of you remember Gideon because he had his army of 300. Starting in verse 11, then the angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak that was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, as his son Gideon was beating out the wheat in the winepress in order to save it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, the Lord is with you, O valiant warrior. Then Gideon said to him, O my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us, and where are all of his miracles which our fathers told us about, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hands of Midian. And the Lord looked at him and said, Go in this your strength, and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. Have I not sent you? And he said to him, O Lord, how shall I deliver Israel? Behold, my family is the least in Manasseh, and I am the youngest of my father's house. But the Lord said to him, Surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat Midian as one man. There's another story that sounds a whole lot like that. You may remember Moses, when God said, Moses, do this. And Moses said, you got the wrong guy. I mean, have you even heard me try to talk to people? I can't voice myself. You don't know what you're doing, God. Which sounds really like an oxymoron. You don't know what you're doing, God, all-knowing. So what did Gideon do at this point? He did what all of us tend to do, but we look at it differently because Midian was one of the judges. He was a hero. He's one of our biblical heroes. And just like Superman or Batman, that we don't ever view as human, that's not right. Gideon was human. He was real. He was just like us, made of flesh and blood. So he did just like we do. In verse 17 he says, show me a sign. Told you to clear. He says, show me a sign. I've got this fleece, God, and I'm going to set this fleece out. I don't know if y'all remember that or not, but he says, God, I need you to show me something. And God does what he says. So Gideon goes on to war, right? No. He says, okay, God, you got that one. Let's try one more time. If you'll do this test one more time for me and it works, then I will be faithful. And he was. But I like to picture Gideon after that, because if he had to ask a second time for God to do the fleece, don't you think after it happened the second time he was still a little timid? But kind of felt like he should probably go ahead and go since 2 tests went through. That's just the way I picture it. At Magnolia, are we actually waiting for signs? Are we avoiding signs? Or are we even open to seeing any of the signs that God has and the plans that He has for us? In Philippians 1 and 6, or chapter 1, verse 6, it says, "For I am confident of this very thing, that He who began a good work in you will perfect it until the day of Jesus Christ." That verse has been used recently here. And you don't need to take it too far out of context. The context here is that the people of Philippi are being told that because they have been faithful to the gospel and because of their participation in the gospel, that their good works will be fulfilled. That God will fulfill them because of their patience, their faithfulness in the gospel. Isn't that where we are? We've tried to maintain a faithfulness in the gospel. We've tried to live that out. But what does our participation in the gospel look like to you? When you sit at home and you're thinking about your spirituality, what does participation in the gospel mean to you personally? You're the only one that's going up there with you. You're the only one that God is looking at on Judgment Day. I can only save me. You can only save you. So what's the participation look like to you? Flip side, what does it look like to the world around you? Then we go back to Gideon. I like Gideon. It's really a fun story, especially when you look at the fact that it was Gideon and the army of 300, and now we have two really cool manly movies called The 300 where people fight, and I like that. That's me. But anyway, Gideon. God comes to him and He says, "Gideon, I want you to take up an army, and I want you to go, and I want you to conquer this humongous army over here." And at first Gideon says, "No, but I need to see a sign." He sees the sign, and so he goes and he calls up an army, and believe it or not, they show up. 22,000 men show up for really a nobody. A guy that nobody really knows. He's not a leader of the Israelites. He's a nobody, but 22,000 men show up. And so Gideon has to be saying, "Okay, God, look what I've done." And God says, "That's too many." And Gideon has to be shaking his head. "Are you kidding me? Look what I've done. I've gotten 22,000 men." And God says, "I know. You have. It's too many. 10,000 is too many too. We need to go down again." And Gideon says, "This is crazy, but it's working for you so far, so let's keep going." He goes down to 300 men. And God says, "Now, when you defeat this army, there will be no doubt who defeated the army. It'll be me, not you." And to me, that's amazing, because isn't that kind of where we are at Magnolia right now? Over the years, back in 1993, we started out 400 or 500 people. We were a novelty. We were the Church of Christ that met with other denominations. We were a novelty, kind of. Over years and years, several years, I was 13 at that point, we won't discuss that, our numbers have gone down. Is it because we're not faithful? I don't think so. Or is it because God is preparing to do something that only He can take credit for? Perspective. We've lost people that are large contributors. We've lost people with talent. We've lost many different things. But when you look at Gideon, do you think that out of 21,700 men, that all of those men that went home, do you think all of them were terrible warriors, and that the 300 that stayed were the good ones? They lost some good warriors. There were some big strapping guys out there that had to go home. I don't know what the plan is, but I'm going to try to keep looking for the signs. In Isaiah 55, 8 through 11. Keep going to Job. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, and neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. For as the rain and the snow come down from heaven, and do not return there without watering the earth, and making it bear and sprout, and furnishing seed to the sower, and bread to the eater, so shall my word be which goes forth from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, without accomplishing what I desire, and without succeeding in the matter of which I sent it. God flat out tells us that what He sees is not what we see. It's just up to us to be faithful. It's up to us to keep looking for the signs. It's up to us to continue to be who He calls us to be. We talked about Job earlier, and Job was angry, and Job was frustrated, but at the end, and God comes back to Job, and He gives him back more than he could have ever imagined. And Job looks at God, or looks towards God, and he says, I have heard of thee by the hearing of ear, but now my eye sees thee. Therefore I retract and I repent in dust and ashes. Job was a human too. And he couldn't stand the fact that he didn't know what was going on. And then he did. And he said, oh God, what have I done? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You knew and I didn't. I'm sorry. In 1 Corinthians 13, 9 through 13, we read 13 a while ago. I always love it when I read a scripture and you have that poof of smoke in your head that goes, I've never seen it that way before. That is really interesting. When we read, I'm really bad at this clicker. I'm going to remember this one. When we read these verses, in 9, it says, for we know in part, and we prophesy in part, but when the perfect comes, the partial will be done away. Okay? Then we're going to skip, though, the next one that everybody kind of knows. In 12, for now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know fully, just as I also have been fully known. Both of those sound the same, but then this verse in the middle, I feel like I've been taught a little differently, and maybe it's just my perception. But right in the middle, you see, when I was a child, I used to speak like a child, think like a child, reason like a child. When I became a man, I did away with childish things, which has always been told to me, when you grow up, you put away your toys and you do big boy things. But when I read it this time, that's not what it meant at all. To me, right there, the writer is saying, I'm still a child because I don't have the knowledge that God has. Right now, I see partially. Right now, I see dimly. But then, when the perfect comes, I shall know fully. When my maturity has grown, not human-wise, but when I have seen what God sees, then I'll know. Don't worry, I'm starting to get close. I've got one last story. The reason it was so important for me to use this today, for those of you who may have seen it before, this was the Bible that my dad used while I was growing up. All through my younger years, teenage years. And he used it to prepare his lessons. He used it to preach from. He uses a different Bible now. He gave a similar Bible to my brother, which was the one that he used in certain things. I choose to believe I got the best one. That's kind of the brotherly competition. I want you to read what my dad wrote in this. This Bible was carried to the podium of the U.S. House of Representatives when I led the prayer that opened Congress at noon on Wednesday, March 28th. This was at the invitation of U.S. Congressman Ronnie Flippo, who was a member at Chisholm Hills a little while back. The podium where I stood is the one used by the President when he addresses Congress. I was introduced by House Speaker Foley, and my family was introduced by Congressman Flippo. It was a great experience. If I stopped there, that's Joe Van Dyke. That's what he did. But as I was reading this, preparing for this lesson, I finished the paragraph. But the greatest thrill of all was that God gave me another wonderful victory. It was only by His power that I was able to stand and pray. To God be the glory. Great things in my life He has done. I may get emotional because the story that I'm about to do is about my dad. But I think I can muster up the strength. We went to Christ Chapel this last week with our teenagers, a few of them, and a guy came up to me and he said, "Doug, I've been led to tell you something." Now, if you've never been to Christ Chapel and you're used to more of a Church of Christ feel, it's a completely different thing there. And we're not used to the "I'm led to tell you something," but anyway, take it for what you feel. What he had to say was extremely powerful in my life. He said, "Doug, I want you to know that God has revealed to me that your dad is not your ceiling. He's not something to reach for or to try to get to. He's your floor for you to build on." To me, that it was amazing. You think about trying to live up to somebody's shoes. How will I ever fill those shoes? How will I ever be as good as he is? But Joe Van Dyke is not my foundation either. He just secured the ground on a good foundation. What good has he done through his faith? Now, I say this because he's in the process of retiring and he's my dad. So those two things put together with faith, that's why I'm going here today. He did mission trips to Jamaica. He baptized a man with AIDS in the 80s when it was unknown what AIDS really was or how you got it. He still continues to unify ministries within the Shoals area and unify our community. His faith has led him, and his eyes were open to signs that God placed before him. Now, I am his son, so I can also assure you he has flaws. He is a man. But that's what I get for not reading straight through. I skipped. God gave us, my dad and others, like I said, He gave us them to secure the floor so that we could have something to build a sturdy structure on. Joe Van Dyke and our past and what we have been, it's not the whole house. It's not our foundation. It's not what we're going to continue to build on. Or it's not what we live in. It's what we're going to continue to build on. And I don't know how many people He's led to Christ. Don't have a clue. But I know one. I know one person that He led to Christ. And I plan on to keep building. And I hope that y'all plan to keep building as well on the foundation that we have. Quite honestly, the family that I see here at Magnolia, if you can picture it in your mind, picture everyone with a little construction hat on. Because that's what I see. I see a family that is ready to build. I see a family that knows the foundation that we're on, and they love it. And they're prepared to build on it. If maybe you don't feel like that. Maybe you've weakened. Maybe your faith isn't growing. Maybe it's declining. Maybe you're in a time of depression where hope is hurting your desire to be who you need to be. I'll let you know, faith is not something that was strong in me before this lesson. I have a belief in a higher being and a belief in God But the faith that he could get me up here and get me through it, I struggle with that every time. But that same night that that guy told me that, it was so interesting to me that I felt different. Because it finally hit me that God is cool with who I am. And if I mess up today, it's not that big a deal. We're still going to sing an invitation song, and we're still going to go to class, and we'll still go eat lunch. Life will not end if I mess up. And when that finally was realized within here, I decided not to wear a tie today. I decided to dress like me, because that is where I was being led to be myself. If that's something that you're struggling with, being who God wants you to be and being yourself, now's the time. Come forward and we'll pray with you or do whatever we need to do to try to help you out. You can come forward or go with someone and pray with them as we stand and sing.
Be with me.